Before the lights go on and the camera starts, an idea forms. Welcome to Bella and I's studio. I want to talk about an experience with an NDE I had 10 years ago. A near-death experience. Experienced a neurological phenomenon. I grew up in Prineville, Oregon. I was born and raised here. This is where I currently live. I remember playing in the neighborhood. When I was a kid, we could play in the whole neighborhood. We had bikes and we'd chase each other and play tag and stuff. Just do child stuff, boy stuff. I grew up with two brothers. I would say this town where I live now was the beginning where I started my journey of discovery, or my pathway to art and creativity. So the connection I have to where I live, other than being born here and being raised here, the apartment I live in, it is part of a remodel where they remodeled the school. So yeah, I went to school here when I was 7 years old. When I was young. This actual apartment where I'm at, me and Bella and I, is actually used to be my homeroom class. There, my teacher, I remember, would read us a story, usually a chapter or two, every day during school. So I really look forward to coming to school because of that. I thought it was pretty cool. It was engaging. I could just let my imagination run free, and I really listened to what he said. He had my full attention when he was reading to us anyway. So I remember going to school here. I remember playing out here, right outside my window here. I remember playing things like tetherball, or there was a couple tetherball structures out here right outside. It was all asphalt up until the grass started, and then in that grass area we'd play soccer. More of an all-out thing where you just kick the ball try to hit the fence when you have possession of the ball. It was really everybody against whoever had the ball. Bella was born here. She was born here too. She grew up here. She's never moved out of this town. I've moved away a couple times and always came back. So the other connections I have is when I was young, same age, 7, 8 years old, I was in a boy choir, and our instructor, Mr. Cochran was his name. He's no longer with us. He was great at organizing things. Him and his wife, we'd go on trips to other towns, big cities like Seattle, San Francisco. We would enter contests, and we would sell magazines and stuff to fund these various ventures we'd go on as a group, and the community really bought into that. And I think that's why I love this town, because I remember what this town gave me when I was young, the experience it gave me as a child growing up in this town, and I love that. And that's what makes this space so much more than just this room, these four walls being my creative space. It's what I actually did in the past in this room, in this space as a child, and what I did just next door in the gym. We did plays. We had bass, alto, soprano, I believe is how it went. He organized all the groups with our boy voice. You had to be a boy. You had to have that voice. As you grow into an adult, you could lose that boy voice. But if you if you practice it, you can keep that young tone. And we did, I remember Huckleberry Finn, we did here next door, where the town was invited to come and watch the show. Dressed the part. We had all the clothes, the costumes. I had my own solo part where we'd audition prior to all this in preparation for these parts with Mr. Cochran and the rest of the group. And so you earned the spot that you get. But that doesn't mean these were my friends. These were the boys, the group that I grew up with singing with. I was comfortable singing in front of them. It didn't bother me. We we had that camaraderie. But when you're singing in front of even just your mom or your friends or anything like that, for me that was intimidating. And to put on top of that, people I didn't know, my friends' moms and their dads that I've never met, and cousins and co-workers were all there. And I had this part, and I was on stage here right next door in this gym, singing as a young boy at 7 years old to these people most I don't know. It was a traumatic experience, but it was part of the creative process and pathway to that I recognize as being instrumental in who I am today. It actually lent a hand in shaping me into who I am today. So this is my connection to this location where I live and where me and Bella hang out and do our thing. This is why I love this town and where I'm at. So my accident happened October 8th of 2016 at around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I remember it because it was so dramatic. It left such an impact on my life. I fell 35 feet onto a gravel driveway because the scaffolding support gave away that I was on. The ambulance showed up and took my coworker and I to the ICU in Redmond. I spent almost 2 weeks in ICU before I got to go home. 10 years ago, I told this story and I uploaded it to YouTube and walked away. It wasn't about creating a channel at that time. I was diagnosed with bilateral calcaneal type 4 Sanders fractures. I broke my back in a few places and made an already existing condition even worse in my lower back with sciatica. And I broke my left hand. Still have my right hand. I could do my dominant hand. That was great. I still had that. So I was thankful. But all my other limbs, they weren't useful for a while. And during that time, my parents were graceful enough to go through that experience with me. October 8th, 2016, around 3 p.m., a coworker and I were on a job painting a structure for a residential client.
My name is Joshua. I'm 39 years old. I fell 2 years ago, 35 feet while at work.
And so we were on his property. He had the scaffolding all set up because he had been doing work prior to us being there. So all this stuff was already at our disposal. It was quick, easy, efficient. We can, get through our job quicker because setting up all that stuff is, a lot of work. So we were backmasking a soffit to spray the body the next day. And this was an unusual structure. It was large, really tall. And I was up in the soffit, the very peak of the structure. But up front, the scaffolding was set up and our ladders were set up on the scaffolding so that we could go up there and do our work. We go up there. I was up in the peak of the soffit and I was stretching the masker out. And as I was stretching the masker out to hand off to my coworker, I noticed the top of my ladder starting to slide.
Gonna back mask a soffit or an eave to ready it for paint the next day. We were 35 feet. I was approximately 35 feet up a ladder in the soffit, in the peak of a soffit, getting ready to stretch paper on a masker and hand it to my coworker.
So I knew that my only way down was going to be falling. I was going to fall. So dropped the masker, obviously, and started to fall. It all happened really quick. If I remember right, it really happened quick.
I noticed the top of my ladder starting to slide down the wall. I knew that I was in trouble. I knew something wasn't right. I looked down, I looked left, I looked right, and I realized that the scaffolding was collapsing underneath the ladder, and the ladder was pushing out from the bottom out.
Time slowed down, and a voice took over in my head, and I thought to myself prior to time slowing down, it did slow down, but I thought my first communication, and I feel this was a deep part of communicating, like I was communicating from deep within, spoke into existence in my mind that I could die from this. That was a realization. So I feel like it was like, I was like E.T. call home. Man, that was the kind of communication I was having, the soul experience. I believe I probably, in hindsight, I left my body then. I already knew it was up. So I knew I could die from this. This was communication. This was the call home, right?
I started falling, and time slowed down right off the bat. That's what I noticed, was that the time slowed down. And I thought to myself, I could die. It felt like something took over. Something took over my body. Something took over my thought process.
I believe it was Jesus Christ. I believe it was definitely Jesus Christ. But the reason why is because later in the story, what he tells me is the same voice that I was hearing as I was falling. The voice that came after that told me how much pressure that I was gonna put on my right foot, and that I was gonna land on my right foot. Almost like I was a puppet at this point. And whatever was controlling me in hindsight was controlling all this and told me how much pressure to put on my right foot, and I could hear the popping and the snapping in my mind. I remember that. And then the voice told me how much to go onto my left foot, that was enough. To go onto my left foot, and I heard the snapping and popping in my mind again. As a result, then I was told to roll forward, and my body rolled forward. I don't believe my mind was controlling my actions in the norm, like we normally do. Like I can move my hands and stuff now. It wasn't that sort of reaction. It was more of a, this is what's happening. It was more of an instructional video.
I started falling, and time slowed down right off the bat. That's what I noticed, was that the time slowed down. And I thought to myself, I could die from this. I really thought I could die from this. And as I was falling, I was thinking in my mind, how am I going to fall? I need to land a certain way. I need to land a certain way to survive. As I was falling, it felt like something took over. Something took over my body. Something took over my thought process. When I hit the ground, my right foot hit first. And I felt it popping. I felt it breaking. I heard these noises in my head.
So I was told to roll forward, so I did. And that's when I hit my hand on the rung and perceivably hit my head, because time sped up at that point. I remember this vividly. And whatever happened after essentially meeting the ground from that height was almost the last thing I remember. The last thing I remember thinking about the cats that I had at home. I was renting an apartment style, well, we'll just call it what it was. I was renting a garage, part of a garage from my friend in Bend, Oregon, and working all the time. As a result, rent was really expensive back in those days. And this is what, I could afford to get ahead. So that was the last thing that went through my mind, was that I don't want to leave my cats behind. I don't want anything bad to happen to my cats. So I don't want to die. And that was E.T. Call Home too. Jesus Christ, with this entity, with this powerful entity that I now understand in a short time, that's what controls everything. Everything. I remember this white veil coming over, seems the front of my vision, like white, just pure white, coming over my vision. And before it went it went completely white. In that same moment, instant, I would say less than a blink of an eye. There was no travel time. I was from there instantly, without body, without any form or recollection of this world, transported to, I believe, the edge of the galaxy, where God was still creating the universe.
Everything started going really fuzzy, bright white, like I was getting knocked out. And I remember the last thought that went through my head was that I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. I immediately got caught up somewhere in what seemed like outer space. I was looking around. I had vision. I had a cognitive way of thinking. However, I didn't remember anything on Earth. I didn't remember Earth, what it was. I didn't remember anything of it, its inhabitants, people, anything, cars, materialistic things. I didn't remember anything of the world.
And I say that just because I was an astronaut and experienced this. Looking around me, I still had a cognitive way of thinking, and I was wondering where I was at. And about the time that I wondered that into, the same voice I was using when I fell, it was similar. The inner voice, the soul. About the time I was wondering where I was at, that's when all the stars. There was no planets. That's why I perceive I was on the edge of the galaxy, where God was still creating the universe. Wherever I was at, all these stars, the only thing that was around came in front of me like a ball. Christ was in control of this, and he was warping all this to fit the image. This ball was, I perceived as like a hive of bees, and that it moved around symbiotically together in equal measure. Every reaction, or everywhere it went, it had an equal and opposite reaction. So everything was in unison. And Jesus commanded this ball to go up to the upper right of my vision, and I was made to look forward. He made me look forward. I couldn't look around like I was just doing cognitively, but I still had a cognitive way of understanding that I was made to look forward. There was no reason, didn't have to be, because where I was, there was no explaining yourself. You just knew. There was a sense of knowing everything, and it wasn't particularly important because there was no sense of urgency where I was at. He went up to the upper right of my vision and created a bust of just his head with a crown of thorns on his head, a bust like a pinlight board, like a night bright board, like you'd stick the little pegs in. That's the only way I've ever really been able to describe that. Most kids growing up in the 80s would know this, maybe even the 90s, but it's a bright light board where you stick pegs in the board, and the light behind it reveals just these pin lights where it's sitting on a dark background. And that's what it looked like to me. And it was Christ's head with a crown of thorns on his head.
Where I was made to feel comfortable. I remember I had no body, just the vision. I was only able to see. I had no body. I was looking around and I noticed there was a bunch of stars, no planet. All these stars, about the time I was wondering where I was and what these things were, and that's all there was stars and my ability to be able to see, and my cognitive way of thinking of wondering where I was at. All these stars came in front of me and formed a ball. Their movements were like bees, or a hive of bees, in that they swarmed around 3 times counterclockwise in front of my face, or in front of my vision, and then they sped out to the right of my vision. And at this point, I wasn't able to really move my vision around. I was just able to look forward. Then all these little bees formed, these bees that were actually stars, formed a picture of Jesus Christ's head with a crown of thorns on his head. Just the bust, just his head, and he was looking off to the left of my vision. And then he mentally told me, without moving his lips, the reason why I'm seeing him is because I contemplate him often.
And he mentally told me that the reason why I was seeing him was because I contemplate him often. I mentally thought back to him, where am I going next? Still have that video, so I'm gonna edit that video into this video in a way. I create art, I communicate, I tell stories.
I woke up in the driveway, in fact, of the homeowner, clutching rocks with my right hand. And I remember some of the first initial thoughts that was running through my mind, because I didn't remember where I was just then. I did not remember that. All I know is that I came to. That's all I could remember at that point. But I was clutching rocks with my right hand, wondering what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.